Well, we have been in a study where we've looked at one of the biographies that chronicles the life of Jesus, and it's the book of John. There's 4 of them, and John is unique in many ways. Most of his content isn't found in the other biographies, and then it's unique just because John has a different way of perceiving the world and telling the story of Jesus. But one of the things that he uses as a literary tool, and this was common in first century writing, is he uses this number 7 and he structures his book around the number 7. So not in a mystical way, but he picks out 7 statements that Jesus makes about himself. And so in Greek, it's ego and me, I am, and he's hearkening back to an experience that Moses had when he was first introduced to God thousands of years before that, where God says, I am, and then Jesus reveals 7 different things about himself. And then John records 7 miracles, and these 7 miracles are meant to be a sign that help us believe. Now, the miracle that we're going to read about this week is unique in that the miracles that have happened previous to this have been in front of crowds. There's, at a wedding, there's water that's turned into wine. There is a man who's been unable to walk for 38 years, and he's then able to walk, and it happens in front of a crowd of people. And then the miracle that we read at the very beginning of chapter 6 is there's a crowd, 5,000 men, easily 15,000 people present, and they're all hungry. And Jesus takes 5 loaves and 2 small fish, and he feeds the thousands, and there's 12 basketfuls of leftovers. Here's what's unique about this miracle. There are only going to be 12 people who observe it. It's a miracle that happens just in front of his immediate disciples, these 12 people that traveled with him. And it's a miracle that I think relates to us in these different areas. It helps us to deal with this challenge that I think almost everybody's experienced. It's like, what happens in the midst of the storms of my life? Like, storms are inevitable. And am I alone in the storms? Does Jesus care about the chaos that's happening in my life? And why is anybody ever asked this, why does God seem to be a little late to the party, right? They're gonna be asking that question. So let's read together from John chapter 6. Here's what has just happened previous to this. They saw Jesus feed these thousands of people, and the crowd is just impressed by Jesus' capacity to provide for them. And so we read this, they tried by force to make him king. So they had a political agenda for Jesus, and Jesus did not have a political agenda for himself. Instead, Jesus had a kingdom agenda. He said, I came to establish something brand new, but it's not in the realm of overthrowing the Roman Empire or taking over the Jewish government. I came to establish a new kingdom that includes people you'd never thought would be included, and to serve and to give rather than to use power. But people have always had a political agenda for Jesus, right? And I think we have to be very cautious that even today we can place a political agenda upon Jesus. But Jesus said, I won't be king, so he slips away. And they're just looking for him, like, where did Jesus go? So we're gonna read about a boat. And I wanna show you a boat, because sometimes it's hard in our mind. Is this like a big pirate vessel? What kind of boat is this? Here's a picture of a boat that is probably very, very similar to the boat that Jesus is going to walk towards. In fact, this is at a museum up in Galilee in Israel. They call it the Jesus boat. Okay? So in 1986, there was an extreme drought around the region where the Sea of Galilee is, and the water began to recede, and a couple of hobbyists, they're archaeologists, but they're hobbyists, were walking through the retreating water where the mud was, and they came across a portion of this boat. And so they called in archaeologists, and the archaeologists eventually were able to take it out piece by piece, and then they soaked it in wax for 11 years to preserve it. And as they date it, they say this boat was used somewhere between 40 BC and 40 AD. So we're right in the time period where Jesus would have been there. So this is very likely a great representation of the boat we're talking about. Dimensions, it's 27 feet long. Any fishermen out there? My drift boat is 16 feet long, so about 10 feet longer than your drift boat, 7.5 feet wide, and seating for 15. All all right? So it is the perfect size for Jesus and his 12 disciples. Let's go ahead and read from the book of John, chapter 6. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now, it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. Let me just pause there for a moment. So there's this massive crowd. They're trying to make Jesus king by force, and it says Jesus evaded them, and he disappeared. He didn't tell his disciples where he was going. He just disappeared into the hillsides by himself. And they're on this far side of the lake where it's remote. There's no place for them to stay. None of them have a home there. And so they're just down by this boat. The crowd's dispersed, and they're waiting for Jesus. And they're waiting for Jesus. And Jesus has undercommunicated and disappeared. And so it's nighttime, and they just don't have any options, so they get into the boat. Are we leaving Jesus behind? Did he expect us to wait? But they don't know what to do, so they get into the boat. Now it's dark. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, the lake is 7 feet wide at its widest, so they're halfway, right in between. They saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on water, and they were frightened. Now, why were they frightened? If you saw somebody walking on water, wouldn't you be like, whoa, that doesn't happen. There's these little things called gravity and human beings sink in water. Well, they're frightened. Luke tells us this, that they thought he was a ghost. They thought a ghost was walking across the water. So they're just terrified because Jesus is operating outside of the realm of anything they have ever perceived. Here's one of the challenges. All of us, me, you, every one of us, we typically like to create a clean, simple box of theology. These are my thoughts about God. He's this big, he does these things, and I don't need him to do much more than that. And Jesus is constantly expanding the box. And he does this for these guys by not showing up. They're waiting. They don't know what to do. So they start heading home. And here comes Jesus walking through the midst of the storm on water. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat. So John's implying here that before Jesus said who he was, they didn't want him in the boat. We don't know who you are or what you are. Are you a spirit? Are you a human? That's scary. This is bad enough. We're in a storm and things are moving back and forth and we're bailing water. Last thing we need is somebody who walks on water jumping on the boat until Jesus says who he is, and then they let him on the boat. And immediately, the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Okay? I don't know how to describe this except for that's awesome. Okay? They're in the middle of a lake. They have 3.5, 4 more miles to get to the other side. They let Jesus in the boat, and suddenly we're on the other side. How did that happen? The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake realized that only one boat had been there, and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but that they had gone away alone. So they're looking for Jesus, and they're like, we saw his disciples get into the boat. We know Jesus disappeared into the hillsides. And so where's Jesus? They can't find him. Then some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. I love this phrase, in search of Jesus. They're searching for Jesus. What do we learn from this miracle? Because it's fairly unique. It's just a small group of people that experience it. Here's point number 1. It's a question. And it's a question, I think if we're honest, we all have asked or maybe are currently asking. It's this: where is Jesus? Where is Jesus? There's something unexpected that's happened in my life. Where are you, Jesus? Something painful, something bad has happened. Where are you, Jesus? How could this be happening? This is a fundamental question that even if you're spiritually unresolved, When crisis happens, we ask this question: if there is a God, where is he right now? Because I need him. And then veteran disciples of Jesus were facing, maybe it's a decision. Do I do this or do I that? And you feel like you've been prayerful and you're just, I'm not hearing anything. Where is Jesus? In tragedy and loss, we ask this question, where is Jesus? And here's what you find in this passage. Everybody's looking for Jesus. He's not meeting anyone's expectations. He's under-communicated to his disciples. He's disappeared, and they're just there waiting. They don't, like, Jesus could at least told us, hey, guys, go ahead on the other side. I'll be walking across the lake to join you later. Jesus doesn't say any of that. He just makes them all wait, and then there's a crowd. They've crossed all the way across this lake 7 miles, and they're looking for Jesus, and Jesus doesn't tell them that he won't be there and that he doesn't, like, nobody knows where he is. I'll just let you know this. I think it's a really healthy thing to be looking for Jesus. To be asking, where are you? And it's not because Jesus is evasive. He's not playing some cosmic game of hide and seek with us. But I think it boils down to this, is I think I know what Jesus should be doing in this moment. And he's not necessarily doing what I think he should be doing. He's not where I want him to be. He's not, for the crowd, he's not willing to be the king that we want him to be. And for the disciples, he's not willing to be the communicating leader that laid out a strategic plan. It's all about developing trust. I'll tell you this. In my lifetime, and I bet you've noticed this as well, Jesus doesn't seem to be in as much of a hurry as I am. I'm in a hurry. Jesus, I need you to answer this prayer. I need you to do this now. I need you to show up in this crisis. And Jesus seems to be a little bit more comfortable moving at a different pace. There's a supreme example of this just a few chapters later into John. We'll talk about this in a few weeks. There's two sisters and a brother. It's a close-knit family. They're very, very meshed in Jesus' life. It's Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Lazarus comes down with a significant illness. And this illness progresses, and the two sisters are worried that their brother's going to die. So they send a messenger to Jesus. And they say, Jesus, Lazarus is ill. We need you to come. Because they know that Jesus has the potential to heal Lazarus. And this is what we read. Jesus stayed after he received the message that Lazarus was sick. And by the time he got there, Lazarus had died. And how do you think those two sisters feel? We needed you. And you didn't show up. And you'll find that over and over in John's book about Jesus, is that Jesus isn't where people want him to be because he understands a bigger agenda. And in Lazarus' situation, he's got a bigger miracle in store than healing a sick man. We'll get to it. But Jesus is never in as much of a hurry as I am. And so I think we should all do what we read, that you just keep searching for Jesus. And if your disciples Jesus didn't tell you where to go, they just jump in the boat, start heading across the lake. Where is Jesus? Secondly, let's talk about the storm. Storms, it's amazing. I think there are 4 different accounts of storms in the 4 books about the life of Jesus, where it's all on the Sea of Galilee, and like it just keeps happening over and over. One of them, Jesus sends them into a storm. Another, Jesus is in the boat and he's sleeping during the storm. And most of these guys are fishermen and they think they're gonna die and they have to wake Jesus up. Like, do you care that we're going to sink? And in this instance, he just lets them wander into a storm. So storms are an inevitable part of life. I wish I could tell you, and you can find people that'll tell you this. Like the minute you give your life to Jesus, like there are no more storms or chaos or controversy in your life. It'll all get easier, and like you'll ride a unicorn through a rainbow, and life's gonna be perfect. You read the Bible, you find incredibly godly people who find themselves in stormy, tumultuous situations over and over and over. In fact, I think storms are the things that help work the lack of faith out of my life, and it reveals my challenges. And the New Testament is clear that the testing in our lives, it creates this opportunity for God to heal what's unhealthy in my life. So test storms, it's inevitable. If you're middle of the storm, you're in good company. If you're not in a storm right now, you're gonna have one coming. It's just part of life. But the question is, what do I do in the midst of the storm? And here's what we typically do. Get afraid. These guys are in the dark. They are 3.5 miles in the middle of a lake. And here comes the wind, here come the waves. Anybody who's been up at Fort Peck, it's a beautiful day, and the wind starts blowing, and you're like, oh no. It goes from tranquil to water's coming into my boat, like that. And that's what they're experiencing. And there's no motor to turn on. There's just like, row, row. And I bet anything, the wind was going against them, because that's the way it always is. So what do they end up experiencing? Fear. Fear, I mean, that's just the natural human experience. We're afraid. We don't have control. And in the midst of their fear and fighting these waves and bailing out of the boat, somebody sees a figure walking across the water, and their fear is heightened. Because this doesn't happen. And here it is, it's Jesus walking across the water, and now they're even more afraid. And here's what Jesus says in the midst of the storm. It is I. Don't be afraid. There are a lot of phrases that are repeated in this book. But you can make a really legitimate case that the most often repeated phrase in the entire Bible is this: don't be afraid. From the ancient Old Testament to the New Testament, every time somebody sees an angel, what does the angel have to say to him? It's different than, like, remember the show Touched by an Angel? Like, you just feel warm and fuzzy. Every time anybody sees an angel in the Bible, they're terrified they're gonna die. And the angel always says, oh, no, don't be afraid. I'm not here to vaporize you. I'm here to give you a message. I'm here to communicate something to you. And so over and over, I mean, it's to the ancient Jewish people, don't be afraid. And it's to modern believers in the first century, do not be afraid. Don't be afraid of what's happening in the government. Don't be afraid of what's happening in your own family dynamic. Don't be afraid of the chaos in your finances. Like, Jesus is just constantly saying, don't be afraid. And this is that dynamic in the storm that you and I experience. So the turmoil, the storm, sometimes it's relational. It could be in the midst of a marriage or a friendship or family dynamics, and it just feels like it's out of control, and the wind is roaring and the waves are ripping, and I can't make these things stop. They're out of my control. It could be chaos in my financial life. It could be you're watching a child or someone you love making self-destructive decisions. It's just a storm and you're just holding on. Whatever it might be. Here's the beautiful thing about this passage. The very thing that is terrifying the disciples, Jesus is standing upon. Whatever it is that causes the turmoil in my life, here's the beautiful thought from this passage. Jesus is Lord of that thing, and he stands upon it. This is a very profound message. There are typically 3 ways that people view deity or God in the environment. Pantheism. There are about 1 billion people on planet Earth that believe in some form of pantheism. And pantheism says that God is found within nature. Okay, he's found inside of nature. And so this is like the old Avatar concept, right? You just find him, you connect with him. There's this life source. God is not within creation, And then some people who there's some sort of creator idea. Deism is there's a God who maybe initiated creation, but now he's absent. He's not intimately involved, but he is an observer in creation. He set up natural laws that make it govern, but he is no longer inserting himself. And then there's another way of viewing God in the world around us, and it's theism, that God exists. And this is what this passage is teaching. In the first century, like people had all different views of God and his involvement or lack of involvement in creation. And if you're on that boat, here's what you know. Jesus is Lord of the storm. He's Lord of the wind. He's Lord of the waves. He's Lord of the chaos. He's Lord of all. Jesus is Lord of creation. And he says, it is I. Don't be afraid. That brings us to the third part. And it's simply this. Invite Jesus into your boat. And when you invite him into your boat, you're inviting him into your storm. I don't know what would have happened if they didn't invite him into the boat. Would the storm have continued and they're like, Jesus says, it is I, don't be afraid. And they don't invite him into the boat and Jesus just keeps walking. Like, okay, guys. You sure? He makes it to the other side and they just stay in the storm. I think the point is it's up to me. Jesus is going to wait. That storm is there. And part of what that storm is meant to elicit in me is a humility where I say, Jesus, I need you to join me in my storm. I need you to join me in the midst of my confusion and my crisis and my lack of understanding. Jesus, would you come into this boat? I'm choosing to believe that you are Lord of this storm. It's an invitation, and for some of us, this is like life, and you have never invited Jesus to captain your boat. I'll give you an opportunity to do that in a little bit. But for a lot of us, there are segments of our life that are stormy and tumultuous, and we think, no, I can figure this out by myself, or we're afraid because, what if I let Jesus into this area of my life? Because I've got some secrets here. I've got some shame here. Or I'm concerned that if I invited Jesus to step into my boat, like he's going to ask me to do something I don't want to do, or he's going to ask me to forgive somebody I don't want to forgive, or he's going to ask me to move to some foreign country. And I just don't know. Do I want Jesus in the boat? And the answer is yes. Jesus isn't afraid of any storm that you and I are facing. Whether it has to do with my relationships or sexuality or addiction or my pride, Jesus is just waiting. He's waiting for us to say, would you join me in this? Because this storm is bigger than I am. And I'm doing everything I can to get to the other side, but I find myself stuck in the middle. And don't you love that little part that said, and when Jesus stepped into the boat, they ended up on the other side? I wonder if there are things that we have been trying to accomplish, storms, crisis that we've been trying to get through all of our life. And it's that moment of surrender when I ask Jesus to enter the fray, the chaos of my life, that I find I'm where I always wanted to be. I don't even know how it happened, because maybe you've been working for years. Something in my past, something where I'm angry and frustrated, and Jesus is in the boat, and suddenly I'm in a place I'd never been able to achieve by myself. I was thinking about this week, the storms. A couple things came to mind. I was just honestly trying to ask myself, hey, what storms are you going through right now? Here's one of the first things that came to mind. Did anybody know it's an election year? And no, I hope you didn't. Bless you. All I remember is this: 4 years ago, I just felt like nobody could get along and everybody was mad, and half the time they were mad at me. And I, like, honestly, just this last week, I was thinking about, oh man, it's election year. Oh. Like, that's what I was thinking. And then I was trying to make a plan, like, how do I navigate my way through another national election and try to make as few enemies as possible? And I thought, Jesus, I need you in this boat. It's gonna get stormy. And I need you to bring your supernatural presence, because I don't know how to fix things. But Jesus, would you sit down in this boat and would you take us to a place that we can't get to by ourselves? I was thinking about my adult kids. I want one of my kids to stay home and be like an insurance salesman or something. Because they're just all involved in these. They're living in places where it's illegal to believe what they believe, or they're risking their lives. And I want to control them. I want to control their future and their decisions and their destiny. And I just said, Jesus, I need you in this boat. Because I get worried and freaked out and concerned for them. But would you calm the wind? Would you calm the waves? Would you bring me to the place I can't get to a place of peace by myself? What's your storm? Don't be afraid to ask Jesus to enter the boat. The thing that terrifies you and I, he stands upon. Because he is Lord of the storm, he is Lord of heaven, he is Lord of earth. And when you invite him into your sinking boat, he moves towards you. You take a moment and pray with me. Father, storms in life are inevitable. We'll all face them. In fact, some of us are facing significant storms right now. And maybe it's a sense of independence, a sense of pride, and we think, I can do this by myself, or I am too ashamed, I'm too embarrassed. Lord, here's what we do. We hear these words, it is I, don't be afraid. And Lord, we invite you into our storm. We invite you into our chaos. Would you take the helm? And would you calm the chaos? And would you bring us to the place we cannot bring ourselves to? And I just want to create space for anybody. This is the moment. For some reason, a series of events have brought you to this moment, this day. And you're ready to surrender your life to Jesus. You've been holding on to the rudder, to the steering wheel, and you realize I'm a terrible captain. And I'm ready to surrender my life to Jesus. If that's you, just want to raise your hand and wave at me. I just want to make eye contact with you. Yes. Yeah, I see you. Anybody else? Yes. If you're in the balcony, will you wave at me if that's you? Okay. Yeah, I see you, and there as well. Yes, I see you. Over here, yeah. In the very back. And if you're online or listening, the Lord sees you. You're his. Amen.